Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being willing to serve on this committee. I'm David Newmeyer. My day job is as Executive Director of Virginia Legal Aid Society based in Lynchburg. Virginia has 9 separate legal aid programs. So what my program sounds statewide, but in fact, we just cover South Central Virginia. And we go basically from the Blue Ridge Parkway to the Suffolk Chesapeake line. So I'm going to give a little description of how this committee got started. And then, Chris, I see that there's a roll call, and I suggest that we do that just as part of our introductions going around the room, because you've given us a nice suggestion of some things to address about each one of us to get acquainted. And so roll call would fit as part of that. So here we go. Thank you so much again. And this committee started most directly. Chitty James did a presentation to the Lynchburg Bar Association in early January. And in his remarks, he raised the question of legal deserts and what are solutions to this growing problem of not having enough lawyers in some parts of the state, and which is truly a national problem. In my fortunately unsuccessful run for state bar president a couple of years ago, that was one of the issues I'd raised, and it's still on my campaign website. Is that it had not been addressed in Virginia. A number of other states have studied the problem, developed some solutions, programs, that kind of thing, and Virginia needed to get caught up in that. So I challenged Chitty to do something about it. So he got me back a couple weeks later. He told me that he was forming a committee and I was going to chair it. So I appreciate the invitation, and I'm really happy to be involved in doing this, and looking forward to working with all of you. Because my legal aid program has such a big rural service area, this is something that we run into all the time, is getting pro bono lawyers to help us out in local counties. And for middle class people and small businesses, they also have trouble in getting access to legal help. Now, many of our counties have, most of the lawyers are prosecutors or do criminal defense work. So it's getting harder and harder to find civil lawyers. So it's something I'm very much aware of. And I'll go ahead and address the rest of the questions that Chris raised. Where did I grow up? I was born in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is going to be at in the path of the total eclipse next week. And my family on both sides is from there. Grew up in 4 different states as my dad was transferred around. Moved to Northern Virginia in the 80s and worked in the U.S. Senate, and most of my career has been in legal aid. In 1990, my wife and I had a couple little kids and wanted to raise them in a smaller community. We've ended up in Lynchburg and been very happy here ever since. So I think I've probably said plenty about myself. So I'm going to go just to go ahead through the tic-tac-toe square in order in which I see them, and call on everybody else. So Patrick, you're up next, at least the first one of you.
Okay, well, thank you, David. My name is Patrick Murphy, and I grew up between Newport News and Hampton here in Virginia, the southeastern part of Virginia. And I am now practicing at the Newport News City Attorney's Office, been here for about 11.5 years. And so I guess it says one great aspect and one drawback of the area on the agenda. One great aspect of Newport News is that while it's a city of over 180,000 people, I call it kind of the biggest small town that I know, because it seems like a lot of people know each other. And so there's a very good communal atmosphere in this city for being as large as it is. I guess the drawback is that it is, well, we still get a lot of great entertainment and great options in this area. There's still a lot of things that we have to go out of our area for. Some of the more larger scale concerts and things like that. And so that's one of the drawbacks, I would say. The reason I'm interested in the committee's work is that I think that the problem is very concerning. And I did see in our executive director's article that Newport News is one of the localities that is actually losing attorneys. And so there's certainly a localized interest there as well. But I want to be a part of the solution that helps Commonwealth wide. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Jerry, I met you several years ago, more than several years ago. I attended a fundraiser that you hosted for Randy Forbes. I had wanted to meet Randy because when he was in the state Senate, he had always voted against legal aid funding. He got to the U.S. House and voted in favor of it. And I wanted to ask him what changed his mind. I think he was totally nonplussed and didn't realize he had voted the way he had voted. So, but it was a pleasure meeting you and being at your house. So please go ahead, Jerry.
Great to be with you all. I hope I'm turned on the mic here. And I grew up in Southwest Virginia, a little town called Gate City, Virginia. The beauty of growing up there is that it's a small town, you know everybody, and that helps. I think it helps to raise children there, although I didn't raise my children there. The bad about growing up in Southwest Virginia, it's closer to 6 other state capitals than it is our own in Richmond. So I'm on this committee because I chair the board at the Appalachian School of Law, and we deal with legal deserts every time we present to the American Bar Association on a variety of issues. So it's something I spoke at the ABA convention recently in Louisville about the legal desert that is all over rural Virginia, but particularly the western part of the state. So I'm happy to be on this committee.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Lola, you are next.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lola Rodriguez Perkins. I currently serve as the Surrey County Attorney, but I have worked in several different jurisdictions around Virginia, including Hampton, Spotsylvania, James City County, and I started my legal practice in the Richmond area. So I've got a little bit of familiarity with some of the other geographic regions. I spent most of my formative years in New Jersey, and then at the age of 15, summer before my sophomore year in high school, my parents relocated to the Northern Virginia area. So I tell them all the time, it's amazing I'm as well adjusted as I am, having been relocated in high school. But one of the great things about the Northern Virginia area is just the number of military families that are there. And my family was not military, but as someone coming into a high school, it was nice that there were so many other new faces and new people. It was a lot easier to adjust versus my small town in New Jersey where everybody had known each other since kindergarten. So let's see. So where do you live and practice now? I live in Williamsburg, but I practice in Surrey County. So I get to take the ferry every day to work, which is actually lovely. And Surrey County is a wonderful small town, small community. And one of the best things about it is that everybody knows each other. And one of the worst things about it is everybody knows each other. So as an outsider coming in, it's been a little bit of a learning curve on that front. And the reason I'm interested in this work is definitely during my time in Surrey, and I've been here about 1.5 years, but even in some jurisdictions prior, I often get questions from citizens, whether it's about, you know, an application because they want to build a barn, or something is going some development is coming in and they want to ask me a bunch of questions about it. And I'm very restricted in what information I can provide. I certainly can't provide them with legal advice. And so I often encourage them to find an attorney to talk to. And in Surrey, that's almost impossible to do. You have to go outside the county line to find an attorney. Very unfortunately, one of our longtime attorneys who did lots of civil work passed away recently. So that has left a very big void in Surrey County's legal options for the citizens. And I have always found as an attorney, it's so much easier to navigate through, especially litigation and even prior to litigation, if you have an attorney on the other side. Well, maybe I should say 95% of the time. Sometimes it depends on the attorney who's on the other side. But that's why I'm interested in working on this group and, as Patrick said, being part of the solution.
Great. Thank you. Bruce, you're next.
All right. I'm Bruce Russell, and I'm just an old country lawyer down here in Lebanon, Virginia. I live over in Abingdon, and I have another little office I have an office in Abingdon where I meet clients by appointment. And I have another little office up there in Tazewell County in the town of Tazewell, where I grew up there in the little village of Cedar Bluff, which is a suburb of the town of Richlands. I still go over there pretty regularly. My parents, who are 88 and 83, still live in Cedar Bluff. And despite my entreaties, they continue to leave their doors unlocked at night unless I'm there, and go around and lock everything up. Because, of course, in my practice, I see some of the underbelly of our wonderful Southwest Virginia community that we have down here. And Jerry, I will say about the Appalachian School of Law, I just hired one of your graduates back in the fall, and she is great. Lakin Schuler is her name. Have you met her? Yeah, she's top flight.
Yes,
and,
great. Thank you.
Yeah, she's great. I'd hire more of those graduates if I could. If any come knocking on my door, I'll be glad to talk to them. But I would say growing up over there in Cedar Bluff, just like Jerry said, there were a lot of benefits to growing up in a small town. And of course, years ago, the economy was really good down here during the coal boom times. And I will say that now is a drawback to this part of Southwest Virginia is we don't have that coal boom. And the coal economy is not here like it was. And that, I think, has fed some of the problems that we have down here. Obviously, we have some economic difficulties to overcome. People are doing what they can to try to make things better in that regard. But we have a really significant drug problem down here, particularly in the more rural areas of Southwest Virginia. It even touches us over there in Washington County and in Abingdon. A lot of my practice is criminal defense work, and all of that is directly or indirectly related to that drug problem. But law enforcement and others are doing what they can with that, but it's definitely an uphill battle. It's a beautiful place down here. I think it still is a wonderful place to raise kids. I'm raising both of my sons down here. I have a son, Clark, who's 15, and I have a son, Eamon, who is 12. We gave him this weird Irish name nobody can spell or pronounce, but he'll have to work that out in therapy later, I suppose. But as for the reasons, the primary reason I was interested in the study committee's work is, of course, when I came back down here to Southwest Virginia, I started out practicing in Charlottesville and had a little practice up there with a couple of attorneys who had a little bit more experience than I did, but not a lot. We had set up in Charlottesville and decided we were going to represent .coms and software developers and become .com millionaires back, and I love this phrase, the turn of the century, back in the year 2000. And we wound up going just dead flat broke doing that. So I came back down here to the mountains to hide out from my creditors and stayed. And I took a job as an assistant Commonwealth's attorney over in Buchanan County, and it did that for a couple of years, and joined the faculty at the law school as a part-time faculty member, and went back into private practice a couple of years after doing that for a variety of reasons. But as we look around here, we need help down here in Southwest Virginia. There's a lot to offer down here, but there are a lot of problems. And I wrote the article that in the Virginia Lawyer magazine, along with Henry Sue, about legal deserts. Henry focused in on the national picture, and I focused in on the issue we have with it down here in Southwest Virginia, or issues that we have, and some of my direct experiences in dealing with clients and potential clients who called and would get in contact with me from great distances, and they talked about the problem of finding help for their problems, and so I've encountered this for years, and this lack of access to justice is definitely a big problem, and I've encountered it directly in my practice. So I just want to do my part to try to help out with that and make that better.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Sandra, you're up.
Hey there, can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Nice to see you, David.
You too, thank you.
Okay.
We're near neighbors, yes.
Yeah, I'm Sandra Chin Gilstrap. I practice in Danville, Virginia. So born in Miami, formative years in Tidewater. That would include Newport News. Our Lady of Mount Carmel is where, Carmel, however they pronounce it, is where I attended elementary school for some time. And we were transplants to Danville. My mother's from Medellin, Colombia. So Miami to Tidewater to Danville. And she thought she'd gone to hell. Then we were transferred to Emporia, Virginia. And I tell everyone she knew she'd gone to hell then. She prayed and promised she'd never complain about a place like Danville. We were transferred back to Danville. And to this day, she is the biggest fan of Danville, Virginia. So my goal was never to come back to Danville. That was high school. I graduated from here, UVA undergrad, went to Miami, gateway to South America. That's where we have all of my mom's family. And I planned on practicing internationally and back and forth with some of her family there. Crazy little thing called love. I came back to Danville. So the drawback of Danville is the stigma. Really, I would say that's the drawback. It's the stigma of the failure to have achieved is how people qualify your return to Danville or your practice in Danville or whatever it is that people are doing here, rather than there being pride in the fact that someone made an intentional choice to move home. And so that's what I would say, because small town, everyone knows, even though you can say small town, big fire, it's wonderful to raise children. It's wonderful to be able to practice and have intimate relationships with clients and other people. In Miami, I did say this, that, if you're going to practice law in a big city, you might not know who the wolves are, but if you're in a small town, you know exactly who they are early on, and their reputation precedes them throughout Southside Virginia. So that's a plus. Danville's, I guess, pride now here, big claim to fame, is we were recognized as we won the national award for Main Street America in the revitalization efforts of all of the downtown district, the warehouses, because we were a big tobacco industry here and textile. So everybody's living off of the revitalization, the awards. The casinos moved to Danville. I can't say that that's great, but in any event, it is here, and there's lots of energy. What I would say about practicing, as I mentioned earlier, is the relationship, the connection that you make with your colleagues at one time, the folks that also made intentional choices to return to Danville. They have since passed away or retired. But those relationships were dear and true. And unfortunately, I don't see that we have those because we're more transient. People come into the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office or the Public Defender's Office, and they leave. They get that experience and they go on to somewhere else. But my basis, or the basis of my interest in this is, it goes back to years ago when my kids were in high school, and I was concerned about the education system here. And I called out the fact that we have to do something because we're going to be a medical and legal desert. We were already en route to that. I wanted kids to be proud to come home. And so the concern is that we are actually a medical desert. The stats prove what my concerns were. We are a legal desert. And I want young, educated children or anyone that is a productive citizen to move home and to contribute to our community. It is tough to serve. And I think most of us go into the practice of law because we really do want to serve in some form or fashion. And when you're pulled, there aren't enough people doing estate work. There aren't enough people doing litigation. I do both. And then I have to choose. If I have, big trials geared up, then I can't talk to the parents of the kids that went to high school with me and that need me to hurry up and help them do something because dad's going in the nursing home or whatever. And then you can't try the case that somebody needs you to try. And so, my push is for young, vibrant, energetic folks to come home. I will say in Halifax, Virginia, years ago, I was in law school. Bobby Connor was the clerk, and he asked me why I wasn't coming back to Southside. And he said, you realize if you don't come back to Southside, you will never be able to experience the change you wish to see. And so I always quote Bobby, and of course my mentor who hustled me into moving back home. But in any event, that's my story. So I want great people to move home, and I'm a big cheerleader. My kids, I'm not sure. One will probably move home, maybe, long journey. She realizes there's a medical desert. The other one is in DC, and what he does in DC will not permit him to move to Danville. So in any event, that's my story.
Wonderful, Sandra. And I should mention also that Danville has 2 minor league baseball teams now, so it is a baseball mecca for
It is, with some kooky names, right?
Yes, indeed. Good. So the new one is something Dairyman. Tell us. Okay. Anyway, go ahead. The Otterbots is the name I'm more familiar with, and that's a wonderful name as well. Thank you. Okay, Jennifer, you're next.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Franklin. I'm a little different than most of you. The practice that I engage in now is through the Appellate Litigation Clinic at William and Mary. I've been working at William and Mary for the last 12 years, teaching legal writing, and now I work on academic success and bar support. And I've everything appellate, anything appellate, because I started off working at the AG's office, doing appellate litigation, and then went to the Supreme Court of Virginia for about 8 years. And I've been from all over Virginia. I grew up in Northern Virginia in a little subsection called Toxamont. That the reality is, even though there were a lot of military families who moved in and out, there's about between 50 and 100 kids that I went to school with from kindergarten all the way through high school. And a lot of them, their families still live in that area. I then went to Blacksburg, go Hokies, and got married and stayed there for a while. My husband's from Bristol, Virginia. We went to Virginia Beach for law school. The only year that I was not in Virginia was when I was clerking in Alabama for 1 year. And then Richmond, and I now currently live both in Stanton, Virginia, and in Williamsburg, because that 175 miles is a little too long for me to commute on a daily basis. So I'm from all over Virginia, and what I have watched during my time working on bar support is the decline in the number of students who are taking the Virginia bar, which directly correlates right to the number of people who are staying in Virginia. And so I'm on this committee in part because I'm trying to help Virginia figure out, one, how to get more people to take the Virginia bar, but also bracing ourselves because in 2028, the National Conference of Bar Examiners will no longer support any portion of the bar that they now do, which means Virginia will lose access to the MBEs, the multiple choice day of their bar exam. And I have no idea what we're planning to do in place of that, but I'm hoping to be helpful as Virginia figures out how to move forward, either with the next generation bar exam that the National Conference of Bar Examiners is creating, or going out completely on its own.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I've several attorney vacancies in my program right now, so I'm feeling the need to attract more lawyers as well. Good. David Weber.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. David Weber. I am a professor at Salisbury University in Salisbury, Maryland, and I and my lawyer, my wife, are the only lawyers in Chincoteague Island, Virginia. And we are not only the only lawyers in Chincoteague, we are the only lawyers in the entire northern 3/4 of the county. And there are only 2 counties in the eastern shore of Virginia. I'm sure you guys know that, Accomack and Northampton counties. And by my count, between the 2 counties, there are 22 lawyers, of whom probably 15 or 14 are actively practicing, and 2 of us are married. And as a state university professor, I am restricted to practicing 8 hours a week. So my practice is 8 hours a week. My wife's practice is full time. So if you really factor it, I think we're somewhere between 10 and 15 lawyers across 2 counties in an area so geographically remote and austere that the Commonwealth forgot to put us on the license plate when they did the Virginia map. So that is why I have been invited to join this group, because it's an unusual situation. And in addition, by way of analogy, just to share with you, so I am the program director of the Fraud and Forensic Accounting program here at the Purdue School, which is part of Salisbury. And forensic accounting is, of course, part of the CPA profession, and the accounting profession is having the exact same thing happen that's happening to the law profession. That there has been a precipitous decline in interest in being a professional and in doing things that require exams, because being a professional is hard, right? It requires doing more than getting out early, making money, and so forth. So I just wanted to share with you that it's an analogy. And Salisbury is an unusual school because it's the only 4-year comprehensive university for all 3 states that are on this side of the Chesapeake. So basically, you know, if you want to go into if you want to experience higher education or get an education other than leaving the shore, this is your only choice across Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And because of that, even though it's a state university for Maryland, Virginia students and Delaware students get in-state tuition here because there's no other school. So I just wanted to share that with you. In terms of my upbringing, I'm the opposite of many of you. I grew up in Manhattan, New York City, in an apartment building, no trees, and I spent my entire life escaping Manhattan, not just from a movie, but for real. And I have had a very different life that's brought me here. I retired as the chief investigator of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission in 2013. I started to teach at the University of Maryland. I got my PhD, forensic accounting, and I decided that I wanted to live on Chincoteague. And the Purdue School and Salisbury University is part of the University of Maryland system, and we brought this program out here. And I became a faculty member, and now I get to live in my beach house. And I've been practicing law out here on the eastern shore of Virginia now for 11 years. And I don't know any other way to describe it other than telling you that I'm not even sure it's in the same planet. So Cameron knows, although I owe you a call, Cameron, we even have judge problems. So, you know, we're part of the second judicial district, but we're 3.5 hours round trip for any circuit judge from Virginia Beach to come out here. And our one and only circuit judge retired in December. So we've had a parade of circuit judges every day coming out here who don't want to be out here and who don't understand the challenges that the 15 of us have. Again, sorry to make it long-winded, but because it's crazy, and Cameron's heard the story, there was a breakout of wild goats, and we don't even know where the goats came from. And we have a drawbridge, by the way. You can't get off the island without the drawbridge. The drawbridge also gets stuck in the open position on occasion. But we had a breakout of goats, and the goats were all over the road. And I was trying to get across the drawbridge, And I just want you to imagine, if any of you have ever been late for court, maybe you go to general district court or circuit court and you get schooled, right? Mr. Weber, Dr. Weber, why weren't you on time? And you're trying to explain to a Virginia Beach judge that there were a bunch of goats that came out of nowhere on a 7-mile long island, and the drawbridge was open and you couldn't get there, and the courthouse is 50 minutes away, even if there's no goats. And it's important for us in terms of practicing law, because of the nature of our practice, we have to increase the number of lawyers that are out here. When I say that there are 14 or 15 lawyers, I'm in my 50s, and I think I'm the youngest lawyer on the entire Eastern Shore, if you exclude the judges. So in the next 5 or 10 years, I think we're going to be down to 5 or 6. And it's a big problem. You know, I'm sure that Sandra is experiencing it as well. One of our biggest phone calls we're getting all the time is for estates and trust fund. People want to draw up their will. People are dying. And we literally turn away 15 to 20 prospective clients a week because we just don't have the time, between one guy working 8 hours a week and a very nice gal working full time. So these are, and then the other desert we have that some of you alluded to is we also have a medical professional desert, that this is a medically underserved area by federal standards. We have no hospital. The nearest hospital is about an hour away, and you know, it's basically a helicopter. That's it. And so we have elders that are socially isolated. We have all the things that come with that: elder exploitation, physical exploitation. We have no lawyers to serve as court-appointed guardians for children. Nobody's going to come over here from Virginia Beach for what the pay is to be a guardian. I mean, it's, you know, the toll for the bridge alone is more than the fee. So these are our problems, and that's why I'm sharing it with you, and I'm blessed that I was asked to be on this. I think that to a certain point there's also a need for the Virginia law schools to provide some type of preference to the Eastern Shore children that want to return here. I'll leave you with that as my final observations. I see Jerry on the screen, and I know that Katie went to Appalachian too. The most recent lawyer who came out here came from Appalachian, but you have Eastern Shore children who are applying to go to William and Mary or UVA or Mason, and they're not getting admitted. And of course, in part, they may not be getting admitted because they were in Chincoteague Combined School, which is a K-12 one-house schoolhouse, and suddenly they're competing with kids who, you know, have 4.0 GPAs whose parents are not watermen. And so it's even at the lowest level that people can't even get into the law schools. And we need to perhaps consider, within the scope of other things that make up a modern school system, that people from rural or austere areas perhaps should receive help. And if they want to return to their home, or if they want to practice law in the public service, that there needs to be an availability for them to be able to go to school in a financially realistic way. All right.
Okay.
Well, anyway, it's nice to meet all of you.
Thank you, David. I have to let you know that in Western Virginia, we all say Appalachian.
I'll say Appalachian. I'm sorry.
That's better. That's better. Thank you.
Allowing those Manhattan roots.
Yeah, I mean, it's, people hear it. It's just like the salsa commercial. New York City.
Okay, Katie.
Hello, my name is Katie Mooney Gallagher, and I work here at Appalachian School of Law. I saw something in a t-shirt that has a big apple, and it's like we're going to throw an apple at you. So if, when in doubt, you know, think about your apple. I work here at ASL, and this is a fairly new role for me. I am Director of Career Services here and also a professor. And I came here about a year ago almost. From Tazewell County. I was a prosecutor for 11 years with Tazewell County, and coming here to the school, it has certainly been a very different experience than when I was here in law school. I graduated with most of my class taking the Virginia bar, whereas really in our 1L class, we don't have all that. Maybe maybe 15 students who are planning on taking the Virginia bar at this point. Obviously, they're 1Ls. Things may change. And we are facing some of the same issues with what is Virginia going to do with our bar exam, whether we're going to adopt the next gen bar exam or we're going to go in the other direction and do our own thing. I think that will probably have a fairly significant influence on whether people are going to take the Virginia bar. You know, typically Virginia is known as one of the harder bars, and I do think that influences students to maybe take a different state that is typically easier and then try to wave in depending where they want to go. So I think this is going to be a really great group, and I think we can solve some major problems, I hope. About me, I am originally from Vero Beach, Florida. People always ask me how I got here, and I got here because I came here to law school and found a wonderful job and wonderful friends and people. Southwest Virginia is unlike any place in this country. The sense of community here is unlike anything I've ever experienced living anywhere else. And I've lived everywhere from New York City to Florida to Denver, and this is my favorite place. People always are wondering, why did you stay here? And the reason I stayed here are the people. Drawbacks, good sushi and good Cuban food. Other than that, I couldn't ask for anything else. I do miss the beach occasionally, but you know, we can hop in the car for that. So very excited to be a part of this, and it's very nice to meet all of you.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie. I want to introduce a guest that I've invited to sit in. Andrea Bridgman has not been named as a member of this committee, but she is a member of the Virginia Access to Justice Commission, and she is chairing a parallel committee on that commission looking at access to justice issues around the state. And something that the commission had decided to do 4 years ago, right before the pandemic, was to conduct a listening tour of various locations about access to justice issues and solutions around the state. So the commission has recently decided to restart that effort, and Andrea is chairing the committee that is taking charge of that. So as we talk today, I'll talk more about how we might work together with her committee. But and Andrea is also a recovering corporate lawyer. Andrea, do you want to tell us where you did that?
Hi, how are you? I apologize for being late. I didn't get the invitation. And frankly, the weird background is I'm actually in the building that used to be the AU Law School. I am taking, I call it classes for old people. So I've stepped out of a class on Manifest Destiny that came after my Latin class. Okay, so we're going with lifelong student at this point. I was raised in Northern Virginia. I left for college. I went to law school in Charlottesville. I never took the Virginia bar. I practiced in DC at a firm for a couple of years, and then went in-house in Virginia and spent something like the last 32 years at Freddie Mac and McLean. But I was always fairly involved in pro bono initiatives, which is how I ended up on the Access to Justice Commission with David. So we have an ad hoc committee put together that has the stated purpose of conducting, I'm going to say 4 to 6 listening meetings around the Commonwealth. And when I solicited David to participate in this, he told me that you were embarking on what is in some ways a parallel effort. And frankly, given the logistical challenges of setting up public meetings around the state, I'm interested in exploring synergy and combining efforts rather than conducting maybe 2 entirely separate sets of meetings. Anyway, I have no interest in joining your committee. I would be thrilled if you would let me listen in so that David doesn't have to try to remember everything and tell me what happened. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, again, I keep listening to this stuff about the bar and thinking the DC bar probably wasn't any easier, but I practiced in Virginia for 40 years. Anyway, thank you all. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I apologize for being late.
Thank you, Andrea, for being with us. Cameron and Chris, I'm not going to let you off the hook here. For people on the committee who have not had the pleasure of working with either of you before, I want to give you also an opportunity to introduce yourselves. Cameron, I don't know whether you plan to be with us for every meeting or just for this first one, but your participation is certainly welcome. And then we'll do you first, and then Chris afterwards.
Dave, there are a couple other participants. I don't want to exclude them.
Okay.
Judge Ortiz, Judge Ashby, if he's, I'm not sure if he's invested yet, and then I think
Okay.
those two we might have skipped.
Thank you, Cameron. They're not visible to me, so thank you for pointing that out. Let's do them first then. Judge Ortiz, would you introduce yourself and I'll talk about why you're here.
Sure. Sorry, I'm not on the video. I am driving back from court in Montgomery County, Christiansburg in Montgomery County, and I'm on 81. And probably shouldn't use my video as I do the call, but so I'll spare you that. I have the privilege of serving on the Court of Appeals. I was a circuit court judge in Fairfax County for 7 years before that. I live in the city of Fairfax. I walk to the courthouse. That's where I keep my chambers. I am born and raised in Northern Virginia. I was born in Alexandria. I grew up in Annandale. And I've practiced in Fairfax City in Northern Virginia prior to taking the bench. I do serve on the Access to Justice Commission with David and Andrea, and I'm excited to be here. I teach at GW downtown, and I am amazed that none of my students want to take the Virginia bar. None of them. It's usually zero. And so it is a problem that is growing and getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm looking forward to solving it and coming up with solutions with the rest of you.
Right. Thank you, Dan. Solomon, I had not heard about the judgeship, so congratulations, and would you introduce yourself?
Thank you all, and I apologize for speaking from my car at this point, but I think it's the quietest place I can get to in short order. My name is Solomon Ashby. I'm an attorney in Portsmouth, Virginia. Home for me was Portsmouth. I graduated high school in Portsmouth. I was born in Norfolk, Virginia, and spent probably the last 8 years in Portsmouth, Virginia. Currently with the firm of McIntyre, Stein and Ashby in Norfolk, Virginia. And in about 2 weeks' time, I will be joining the bench in Portsmouth, Virginia. My practice has been a little bit all over the place, just to give you a sense of how I ended up doing a lot of things for folks out in more rural areas. I started out with Wilcox and Savage doing insurance defense litigation, big products, asbestos cases. Did that for about 4 or 5 years. I then went to Virginia following my wife and continued a similar type of practice. But I came back to the area first in Suffolk as a assistant city attorney. Did that for about 4 or 5 years before I became the city attorney for the city of Portsmouth. Did that about 5 years, and then I went back into private practice before getting this judgeship. One of the things I was asked to consider to join this committee, but one of the reasons I think it's most important and the things I've seen, because when I went back to private practice, I did go after a sort of broad practice. I wasn't necessarily personal injury only. I did some things for folks who had municipal issues and that sort of thing. And as I'm sure those of you that practice in rural areas are aware, that 2 things always came up. One, in a rural area, nobody trusts the local attorneys to go against whatever the big entity is in that county. And so I had a listing on blacklawyers.com, and I also did Virginia State Bar Lawyer Referral. And probably through those, I got more rural county calls because nobody wanted to go up against the electric cooperative with a lawyer from town. And so I would get those calls through Virginia State Bar. Talking to African-American attorneys, again, because there was generally, as you all have kind of set up, There are certain prosecutors, and then there are 2 or 3 defense firms in town. And if you have any questions about one or the other, you got to go out of town. So I would get calls from Lynchburg, Danville, everywhere, depending on the issue. And then when you have issues of small communities, demographics, whether there's a racial issue or whether there's just a small population, which I know is the case, once we get past 95, I would get calls from all over the place. And unfortunately, could not serve everyone, but certainly appreciate the need to have a healthy legal economy such that folks don't get concerned about whether there's collaboration on both sides, because there's so few attorneys and they're swapping places depending on what's going on in terms of positions of representing folks and different entities. So my hope is that my new judgeship won't impact me to the point where I need to leave, because I do think in the last 5 years I've gotten, this issue flows with a number of issues I've been involved in all the way through undergraduate, but most importantly, I think the last 5 years I've had a chance to kind of get some insight from some folks out rural. And as you all have seen from the information, you only need to go beyond really Portsmouth city limits going west, and you start getting into these lawyer issues. And I practiced in Suffolk. I've got family out in Southampton County. Let me say about family. I've got family throughout Southampton County. That's where I spent my summers growing up. Franklin, Southampton County area, Suffolk. And so there again, once you get out there, you have these kind of issues. And there's the old saying, to the extent that the larger community has a cold, the African-American community has the flu. So our scarcity of attorneys going out west and then in the rural area is tremendous. And so that's why I hope to at least give some insight and hopefully contribute to the discussion in some areas of improvement, because I too am one of those 50-some-year-old individuals, and I don't see, even in the city of Portsmouth, as I'm being elevated, when I look back to see who's going to backfill the coffers or even backfill my practice, there aren't many folks available. Thanks.
Solomon, thank you. You've also recently been president of the Old Dominion Bar Association. So I know you have a statewide perspective from that as well.
Certainly. That has been helpful, and again, gives great insight in terms of going out west, and hopefully we can come up with some objectives and some programs to increase the numbers out in the western part of the Commonwealth.
Wonderful. Okay, Cameron, am I missing anybody else before I turn to you?
No, I think we've got everybody else covered that's has their camera off.
Good. All right. Thank you, Cameron. Cameron also has a very interesting background, which I thought people just should know.
Yeah, so thank you, David, and thank you all for participating. This is really important work, and I'll get into that in a second, but just as way of background, I too am originally from New Jersey, so Lola will have to compare notes. I grew up in a rural part of New Jersey, and it's not a contradiction in terms to say that. I worked on a farm. I can talk to you all about the differences between orchard grass, timothy, and alfalfa. But I saw my way out of the Garden State and made it down to Virginia, and then went to college here and law school here. And then I practiced in Hampton Roads for about 10 years before I moved to the bar about 5 years ago. I've lived everywhere on 64, from Charlottesville, Williamsburg, Norfolk, Richmond. I'm bound to die in Stanton, and I'm quite okay with that. I've been out there and I love it. It's a charming town. So I don't think there's any other place on 64 that I haven't lived. And so, that's a little bit about my background. The reason that this is important and why we've gathered you all to participate is because organizationally, I selfishly started to look at this and a related matter pertaining to our finances to kind of to do a deeper analysis, right? So the most stark thing for me that I saw began about 4 years ago when I saw the peak of lawyer admissions was in 2013. I've written about this. I know everybody has read my Virginia lawyer column several times and recommended it to their friends and their pets, but the numbers are just stark. When we had 2013, we had 2,200 new admittees in the bar. Last year it was, or 2023, I guess it was, or 2022 is 808. That's a 65% decline. You can't run an ice cream stand, you can't run a hot dog stand, you can't do anything and expect your business to last if you have a 65% decline. So we have to address this. If we all believe, as I think we do, that lawyers provide a societal good, what can we do to fix these problems? And everybody's touched upon an aspect of it. And a conversation I had today with Chris before this is that this topic is a mile wide at least, and you can go very deep. One of the problems I suspect you'll have is to limit your focus to the correct columns that we can most effectively impact. And it's going to require a lot of stakeholders, not just lawyers and judges, but the General Assembly, the law schools, as everyone's noted, chambers of commerce, local businesses. Everybody has to understand the implications of having fewer lawyers. So I take this very much to heart. We began this work in the fall. I touched upon, as I said, in the February column, I addressed some of the financial implications to this, at least for the bar as an organization. In the April column, which I know you all are waiting with bated breath for, but you'll get it soon in your inboxes. It's coming. And so it's really important work. Final point, this is not just a hodgepodge of faces we put together. You all have been curated. Chitty chose from a recommended list of people to appoint, and you all bring something to the table that we view as critically important to addressing this. So very appreciative, thankful for you to join. Even David, if he's going to call it Appalachian, and Chincoteague, it's 2 syllables, Chincoteague, not Chincoteague. I used to vacation there as a kid, so I'm going to pick on David just because we can do that.
Yep,
He's a
other
Yankees
David.
fan. I'm a Mets fan, but that's all right. Thank you,
Well,
guys.
I heard just for fairness, somebody else said Louisville. And I can at least complain and say it's Louisville.
Louisville, yeah.
Thank you. All right. Cameron, thank you for your efforts already in this regard. And you were also active duty Navy for a while, am I right?
Yeah. Between law school or college and law school, and I'm still a reservist. So, been around mostly in Virginia as an adult, with the exception of Florida, Rhode Island, and California. So, so those are my geographical spans. Kind of like Katie, who's moved around a bit.
Okay, good. Thank you. Chris, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. I am going to start with my role here at the bar, but then I'm going to take a little go on a tributary to introduce Henry Sue. He's the only member who's not with us today, and he answered my questions in advance so that I could share some information about him so y'all can get to know him in absentia. I am the Director of Access to Legal Services here at the Virginia State Bar, so I'm on staff, and it's part of my current job description is supporting this committee. I'm really excited about that for a number of reasons. I am one of the individuals that believes lawyers make the world a better place. That's probably a biased perspective because I am an attorney, but I also work very closely with the attorneys that I feel like are doing God's work. So legal aid attorneys, indigent defense attorneys, and private attorneys, corporate counsel attorneys that are devoting at least some portion of their time to serving the public good through volunteering for the bar or doing pro bono work. So recognizing that bias, I certainly do bring this view that we need more lawyers in Virginia. And then also as the Director of Access to Legal Services, I see the critical role that lawyers play in bringing access to justice to so many people in the Commonwealth. And in my role as Director of Access, I'm also overseeing the Virginia Lawyer Referral Service. And you all might be very surprised to hear that we only have 175 lawyers serving that statewide program right now. So every day we get calls, particularly in rural areas of Virginia, from consumers who want to pay for legal services and they can't find an attorney through our lawyer referral service to meet those needs. So I look at this from everything from legal aid all the way through to people who can afford to pay for legal services, but for whatever reason aren't able to access them. Henry is a DC-based lawyer, but he actually grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia. So he has unique perspective in that regard. On the roster, he's listed as the chair of the ABA Standing Committee for Pro Bono and Public Service. And that is really just one of his hats. And because of that connection with the ABA committee, I think he is really interested in how the work of this committee is going to better inform strategies and approaches that the ABA takes to closing the justice gaps specifically. But then he's also on the bar's standing committee on access to legal services. So he's interested in the related but separate question of ensuring access to legal services by members of the public, regardless of income, right? Because it's broader than just underserved populations. He's also an adjunct professor at American University Washington College of Law. So I think he's got an interest in this from the law school perspective as well. He grew up in Portsmouth, and he said that one of the best things about that was just the being surrounded by water, the James River, the Chesapeake Bay, the Atlantic Ocean. So much of the daily life of his family and other residents revolve around the water. And he said that the water can be a big drawback too. Bridges and tunnels that attorneys and residents have to travel through to access the courts and other services. And that's, really can be challenging when that traffic backs up. And he's now in the DMV area of Virginia. And he says one of the major positive aspects there is that it's just a place full of lawyers, right? So there's all kinds of positions for lawyers in government law and law firms and nonprofits and trade associations, public interest. That area, I think, supports no less than 7 law schools, including American, where he teaches. And then he said one drawback is that it can be awfully hard to think about leaving the area. He's been thinking about leaving to go somewhere else to teach at a law school. And he says if that job falls through or he decides that's not what he wants to do long term, would he have to relocate his family again in order to find a position? So he's really on the committee and interested in the committee's work because of the roles that he has related to access to justice and access to legal services. And then from his perspective as an adjunct professor at a law school. He also wrote one of the articles in Virginia Lawyer Magazine. I think it was in the October of 2023 issue, specifically looking at legal deserts from a national perspective. So the ABA is definitely tracking this issue. And I think he's very excited to see that Virginia is putting in time to address it here in the Commonwealth. And my background, because I skipped over that, is I actually grew up in a small town in North Carolina, Surry County, so home of Mayberry. I had 72 people in my graduating class at high school, so really, really small as compared to my husband, who grew up in Fairfax and had over 720 in his graduating class. I loved growing up in a small town. There were so many great opportunities to participate in everything because, as a middle school and high school student, there weren't very many of us. So we got to play all the sports that we wanted to play, and it was a very safe place to grow up. I loved knowing everyone that was there, but I didn't like having to drive to Winston-Salem to go to the mall. And then I came to Richmond to attend law school and never left because I loved it so much. And I'm still in Richmond, but I do miss small town North Carolina.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you also for interviewing Henry for us as well. That's a useful background as well. Good. I think we've introduced everybody, and thank you all for that. We will eventually spend some time in person together, but in our online time, it's nice to know more about each other. So I really appreciate all of this. We have several more topics to cover, and our scheduled time was to finish by 3 p.m. So we'll do a time check a little before 3 and see whether people want to keep going or finish the agenda at our next meeting. The next topic on the agenda was identifying our charge, defining the committee problem statement and scope of work. And I've asked Chris to talk to us about the elements within those. I do want to mention also that I'm not a fan of the committee name given to us by Ginny James. Lawyer population sounds like we're concerned with lawyer fertility. And I'm not sure, maybe that's our goal. But I'm questioning that right now. So in my view, that's also a topic for discussion and change as well. But Chris, would you please go ahead?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great segue, because one could say that a possible focus could be on breeding more Virginia lawyers, specific, in whatever way we define breeding, right? Bringing more to law school here, making sure more that go to law school here stay. And I think that if you look at the agenda, 3A, the first topic under identifying our charges, the general issue of declining lawyer numbers and related impacts. And I just want to share some points of clarification there for the committee to consider. I really think that this can be broken down a little bit. First, we have overall lawyer population concerns, the bar specifically. And when I say lawyer population, I really mean the number of active members of the Virginia State Bar. And we're looking at this really currently and projected numbers, right? So currently we're seeing, if we look back over the last 20 years, that we've had about 22% growth in active lawyer numbers here in Virginia. But during that same period of time, we're seeing, and particularly in the last decade, we're seeing a decline in the bar exam takers, which to me translates into new lawyers coming into Virginia. Maybe that's related to admissions requirements. It may also be related to a possible decline in enrollment and graduation numbers at Virginia law schools that have historically produced Virginia attorneys. I don't know if we have that data or if it's something that we could find out. But then we're also looking at an anticipated overall decline in lawyers due to fewer bar exam takers and anticipated retirement of senior lawyers. So what we have seen is that senior lawyers have stayed in practice for much longer. There's, in the memo that I provided to you all as background information, you can see the trending chart there that those numbers have gone up, those reaching the 50 years of practice milestone. And that population of really baby boomers has offset the decline in Virginia bar exam takers. And so I think that's part of the reason why this general concerning trend hasn't been visible to the larger profession, because our numbers really haven't been down, but we're anticipating that they are going to go down. And then we also have this third concern that's related to a decline or at least a slowing of growth in lawyer numbers in some specific geographic locations, particularly in rural areas. And that may not necessarily be the result of an overall decline or slowed growth in the whole Commonwealth. It may be a growing uneven distribution, which really leads to item 3B, which is the topic of legal deserts and their related impact. So for those of you that have looked at the resources that I provided on the online reading list, most of the articles and other sources are going to define legal deserts as an area that has fewer than one attorney per 1,000 residents. But I think that the committee needs to think about whether that's the definition, if a focus is going to be legal deserts, that we want to adopt, or if our understanding of legal deserts is going to be, broader than that or include other considerations. I think if we just are using those numbers, then we can pretty easily identify the Virginia legal deserts. But I will say that we have to consider that not every active Virginia State Bar member is going to be available to provide legal services to the public in those locations. And on top of that, even if they are active practicing attorneys, what type of practice are they doing, and how does that match up with the legal needs of the community that they're living and working in? So I think that for the legal deserts question, more data needs to be collected, and it may not be readily available through the state bar's membership records. So that might require surveys and other research methodology in order to gather that information. And then I certainly think that one thing that we really need to be focused on is the visibility of these issues overall, which internally, with Cameron's executive director messages, we're working on, but we would like to see buy-in from the larger bar population. And then what are the solutions to these issues? And that's really going to be driven by what the focus of the committee's work is going to be. Is it how do we get more lawyers in Virginia? And if that's the focus, understanding how that impacts other concerns that have been raised, because just getting more lawyers to Virginia may not solve the problem of, access to legal services in these areas where lawyers aren't practicing, and access to justice as a whole. I think that we need to think about all of our work in SMART terms. So what that means is that we're thinking about work being and solutions and the work product being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound in terms of our goals and objectives. So perhaps that looks like a report like the one that was published by the Lawyer Wellness Committee back in 2019 that kind of raises visibility of the issues across the board and then offers solutions, and then perhaps other interested stakeholders can build on the work from there. So I think there's a lot of options, and I just want to be really thoughtful about the approach that we take, and making sure that we don't end up getting involved in, mission creep, essentially. So I'll turn it back over to you, David. I think that sort of frames the issue from my perspective of how I'd been looking at it, but I know you have more to add.
Thank you, Chris. Good description. Yeah, I share the vision that you do that our ending work product will be a report that makes recommendations, but it may make recommendations to a variety of different bodies, certainly to the state bar, but perhaps also to the General Assembly. Someone mentioned chambers of commerce as also having equal stake. There may be a variety of stakeholders that would want to be not only heard, but considered in what solutions we adopt as well. So I think a report can be broad ranging, even if solutions are not, every solution is not something that the bar itself works on. So that's my own view. Let me ask committee members right now, what particular interest comments do you have about defining our mission or what our finished product looks like? I guess we're all in agreement.
Well, and I think, David, it's super important for us to define the focus before we move into, what the solutions will be, because I see the solutions to the general lawyer population problem being overlapping with, but also somewhat unique to the problem of rural lawyer shortages or legal deserts, or how lawyer shortages impact access to justice. So getting feedback and input from the committee on what the charge should be, keeping in mind those SMART goals, is really what I think we need to do today.
Well, I would ask if this doesn't beg the question of how do we define legal desert? As you mentioned, like from there, I believe if the committee would agree on what it is that we're going to use as our markers to define that, then that would drive the rest of the large part the mission and what our goal is. I don't know. I just, again, as you were saying, we can start to actually spread ourselves very thinly and become overwhelmed, or you know, overwhelmed in channel surfing, I should say, in trying to get to the place where we never get if we don't have the initial definition of what a legal desert is. If that's in fact the issue, or is that not a concern? Is it just, like you said, is it just population, or is it we're going to use what the ABA is saying or others, what a desert is? Anyway, that's 2 cents.
I think excellent point, Sandra. But Chris, at the same time, well, I think our focus does need to be on the desert question, because that's how this came up, and I think is evolved, and I think that's what Chitty has in mind. At the same time, a committee like this is not going to exist for a while after we're done. So I think flagging other things such as the overall lawyer population as perhaps needing more attention by somebody else is not irrelevant for us. Okay. Sandra, with regard to your question, defining legal desert, Chris, could you give us that ABA definition again? Was that the ABA about the number of lawyers per 1,000 people?
Yes, it's fewer than one attorney per 1,000 residents. And again, I think that there's some really interesting nuances in there, because if we're looking just based on the Virginia State Bar membership records, you know, we can tell you how many active attorneys there are, but just based on my experience of, you know, voluntary pro bono reporting, I have tons of people that fill out that form and say, I'm an active member of the Virginia State Bar, but I'm a government attorney and I can't do pro bono, or I've maintained my active status, but I actually own my own business now and I'm not practicing law at all. You know, so I think some survey work would have to be done to understand who are the lawyers in these locations, and what are they doing? And specifically, who are the active bar members in these locations and what are they doing professionally and in their practice?
Yeah. And in the small communities, guys, and I guess most of the folks on the screen here understand, it may not be technically pro bono, but if you were to actually determine, you know, try to calculate what you have spent into court, spent in representing folks court appointed, work is essentially pro bono when it's still $55 an hour for out of court time, $75 an hour in court time. So there are lots of folks in rural areas. I know in Southside Virginia, I don't know what they're putting on their renewal forms, what they're marking on the renewal forms. But I know a lot of folks in Southside Virginia, that is a large part of their practice is actually court appointed work. So GAL work for adults and for the children, and then criminal work, adult and children.
Yeah.
So
I suspect our desired outcome is to increase the number of lawyers who are available for general practice. There are so many civil needs.
Yeah,
it's great, you know, if your Commonwealth attorney is fully staffed, which most of them are not, but those prosecutors are not available for civil practice. And I think that is the need that we see across all of our communities.
but then you're torn because the courts ask you. I mean, you know, you have clients that you need to serve, as we were saying, in litigation or trust and estates, et cetera. And then the judges and the clerks are calling, begging you to take court-appointed work too. Not everybody can do civil and criminal, but certainly the folks that can do civil and criminal are being stretched even further because they are trying to serve their community the best they can.
Other comments
Bruce
on
has
this?
his hand up.
I'm sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
All right. Now, Henry was involved with an ABA commission that was similar to this. Was he not? And did they not have some difficulty with defining their mission during the existence of that, or am I just imagining that?
I don't know about the issue of defining their mission. I think they did struggle with the issue of accurately defining the active lawyer population and making that an apples to apples comparison across all states, because different states define active membership in different ways. I mean, Cameron can probably speak to that more since he's the executive director and has more visibility into what other states are doing. But I didn't know whether they were confused about their mission. I feel like they were pretty squarely focused on the issue of legal deserts, but it was a numbers game for them. You know, it's like we just strictly look at the best information, the best data we have available in terms of active lawyer population numbers compared with the Census Bureau data, and then run that equation. Like, in what areas do we have fewer than one per 1,000 residents? And then if you simply think about solving legal deserts by bringing more attorneys, you know, you can extrapolate out how many attorneys are needed in each area to ameliorate the numbers problem, you know. But we have all these other practical considerations that have come up, you know, just even in this discussion about who are those lawyers and what are they doing.
I feel like the definition of legal desert is too restrictive, and to try and solve that problem, maybe setting ourselves up for failure, because there are so many other factors, as many folks have already discussed, as to whether you go to a smaller community, live there, work there, set up your practice there. And so that's my concern, that I think we need to broaden that definition or the scope of our work a bit more. And to me, it seems that if we can get more folks to sit for the Virginia bar and to therefore have that sense of, well, I need to stay in Virginia at least for 5 years because I don't want to have to take another bar exam. That's often a very motivating a motivating factor in getting individuals to stay in a particular state.
I'll raise a related question. There's growth now in Western states, particularly in Alaska, in experimentation with use of non-attorney advocates to take part of very defined areas of law. Washington State did an experiment with limited licensed legal technicians, they call them, that was pretty onerous to be able to qualify for, and expecting people to qualify and then sort of go into private practice in very limited areas, such as simple divorce, such as landlord tenant, whatever. It got very few takers because it was so difficult to qualify for. Alaska, a Supreme Court has approved a series of what they call community navigators. Community justice workers is the title, who are trained and supervised by the legal aid program in Alaska to do evictions, to do child custody. They do, I think, simple wills. They also do Indian Child Welfare Act cases. And so these are non-attorneys who are already lived and trusted in local communities, who are trained, and it's being, I think, carefully studied and evaluated as it goes forward. But so far, it looks like it's been a success. So that may be a solution that we want to consider saying something about, if it's going to be difficult for us to suddenly make Russell County a mecca for new law grads. And I think the Access to Justice Commission is going to be looking at similar kinds of issues as well. Let me suggest this. It's 2:50 p.m. and we haven't touched on the other two subject areas yet. And my thought is right now that we would touch on those other subjects as well, just to gather thoughts and comments. And then after this meeting is over with, Chris, you and I can do some drafting in each one of these areas with recommendations to the committee, so that our next meeting, we could actually, debate some written proposals for how do we define our work, defining these other issues, and the committee can debate and vote on those so that we can move forward with that. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay, thank you. Topic 5 was our information gathering process. How do we want to approach research, identifying stakeholders, series of field hearings, research teams, inviting guest speakers. Those are all ways of gathering information. I do think field hearings are very important for us to be able to hear from people in local communities about how they're affected, whether their family, their business, whatever, how they're affected by not being able to get legal assistance when they need it. That will, I think, help us point us and give us a sense of the urgency as well. Research teams, I'm finding out more about what the ABA and other bars have done. And then guest speakers, may have been people who have done a lot of this work already that we want to hear from. So thoughts and comments on each of these?
I think that so much of this, David, is going to be dependent on the agreed upon scope of the committee's work. So it may be a bit premature. I think it's great to sort of put it on this committee's radar, because it may make, options for exploring particular topics more realistic, like a partnership with the commission. It also means that we have an invested partner that could take on some things that maybe are outside of the scope of this committee. More than anything, I think there just has to be a decision on what are we solving for? Are we just trying to increase lawyer numbers? Are we trying to increase lawyer numbers so that we're increasing the pipeline to then fill legal desert problems, to address legal desert problems? And then are we looking specifically at how lawyers provide access to justice, or could potentially provide access to justice, or do we go beyond that? And so those are the things that I think that the committee really has to ponder in terms of the scope of the work.
Chris, I absolutely agree with you, but I think the more I think about it, the more valuable it is for you and I to put a draft in front of the committee.
Yeah, absolutely. I just didn't want anyone to get too far down the road of identifying stakeholders before we do the work on our scope and mission.
Well, that's why I'm asking for comment right now on these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we hear from Dr. Weber? In my mind, you're a data analytics man. And so you can realistically look at this broad, our dream here to answer all of this. And you can weigh in. I just think that would be helpful.
I have been thinking of the data. It's ironic. I'm sorry to get put under the piano, so to speak, but I have been thinking about it. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of demographic factors, right? It's not just, I think we need to know age of current members. I mean, I think we need to know the demographics of our membership. In addition, we can draw on census data, but we can draw federal census data to understand how many people there are in each of these circuits or regions. We can draw on demographic data, I'm assuming from VSB, if we're allowed to see it, in terms of dates of birth, things like that. I'm just throwing out there for you. It's neither here nor there. I'm just identifying it. Probably want to think about gender too. I'm curious to see if there's a disparity between rural and urban areas in terms of the gender of the lawyers. Certainly, this is anecdotal observation, but out here on the Eastern Shore, I think my wife is one of only 2 or 3. I mean, it's shocking. Even by shocking standards, it's shocking. And I think that that is a role in terms of family law, adoptions, other things where clients just prefer a particular gender. Again, I'm not trying to get into anything. I'm just pointing out that I think we want to see the demographics as a whole so we can try to understand what the issue is. And I agree with Sandra, until we know that demographics, it's hard for us to know what the issue is.
David, were you also suggesting demographics of communities or just
Yes.
of lawyers? Okay.
Yeah, because I think that, again, it goes to the income of the area, right? So, yes, I think the demographics of the area are important. So using, again, the Eastern Shore, which is a very boom bust cycle because it's tourism and water, right? It's the agriculture. People have money during certain seasons and they don't have money during other seasons. They're able to sometimes access justice across the bay when they have money, but when they don't have money, there's no access to justice. You know, during the winter months, nobody's got money out here. You know, unless you work for the government, you know, they're restricted in when they can fish. They're restricted in when they can catch things, either by the weather or by regulations, or by the crops not being in the ground or the tourists not being here. So I do appreciate what Sandra's saying. I think it needs to be much broader. We need to look at the population of Virginia and the lawyer population and all the demographics that comes with that. Again, I don't know what it's going to show.
Right.
But it may show us things that we don't expect. So for example, when Cameron mentions the number of people taking the bar, I'd be curious what those demographics are too.
David, perhaps you can help guide us to resources that would give us that kind of information so we're not, wandering in the wilderness, in the data wilderness there.
I know that there's at least some of that in the Census Bureau, at least on the community demographics. Maybe there's some information we can glean from legal aid programs too, David. I can look at VLRS calls, which is not something that I thought of before in relationship to this committee, but just the number of calls that we're getting from certain areas of the state that like we're having to turn away those individuals to say, no, we don't have a lawyer. And I think that it'd be helpful for us to maybe look at whether it's possible for us to do a partnership with the commission and a third party to do, if we all agree that looking at legal deserts, it's going to be at least part of our focus, maybe to do legal desert maps, because the legal desert maps take into account a lot of this information that you're talking about, David.
Yep. Yeah, I'm very interested in legal desert maps.
I'm just going to mention it. I'm just throwing it out there because it's an email inquiry that I could make. One of the other premier programs that's here at our university that has nothing to do with me, but they might be useful based on what Krista just said, is a geographical information, GIS. There's a whole GIS program out here where they might actually be able to help us map it, because GIS has become very challenging, again, in rural areas for identifying farmland, wetland runoff, where the fisheries are. That's why GIS is out here, because we're literally bracketed by two huge water bodies. But I could ask them if they're willing to help or allow students to help, things like that. That's something I can do very quickly.
Right, yeah. Desert maps are also something the National Center for State Courts does now, and the Self-Represented Litigation Network is another source. So yeah, these things do exist.
I was also going to recommend the Weldon Cooper Center.
Absolutely.
And one other thing I also wanted to mention, just in the, the memo that we provided, we being staff here at the bar, talks a lot about membership trends, and then everything that we do geographically is based on circuit, which I think is just important for us to understand as a group, just because some circuits are very diverse in terms of what the individual locations look like within that circuit. So the cities and counties and even the towns. So that's one thing. And then defining rural and urban is something that we need to think about, because it was definitely a subjective decision on our part to sort of identify certain circuits as rural and urban. And we want to be just very careful that we're all on the same page when it comes to that. And if that means that our trending and our mapping looks a little bit different than it did, when we first approached this as staff, then I think that's okay, as long as we're all on the same page about how we're defining rural and urban and being transparent about that when we report out.
One thing I would suggest we add as an overlay to get to the bottom of this issue. And one, we have to take out the municipal attorneys. I would say local government attorneys, but some of those are private. We need to remove the municipal attorneys because if you don't remember, I guess it was several years ago, VADA opened a local government division because in most cities, the city attorney's office was probably the biggest body. They offered a group membership because the city attorney's office was probably the biggest body of defense attorneys in municipalities. So if we take those out, and understanding rural is a little different than the urban setting, we probably have to find an overlay to remove the personal injury attorneys and the criminal attorneys, because I suspect that practice is prevalent. And when you go anywhere else, you're going to get down to zeros for long distances. I don't know how we do that, but that's at least a consideration when we're talking about offering legal services to individuals.
Well, and I'd say that there was a JLARC study that was released, earlier this year or late last year, that essentially said that attorney shortages are impacting Commonwealth attorneys, public defenders, court-appointed lists. So I do think it's a problem that they want to see addressed as well. In fact, I've had conversations with someone who's with the Virginia Indigent Defense Commission who has concerns about declining Virginia lawyer numbers and their ability to attract and retain not only public defenders overall, but specifically in certain areas of the Commonwealth. So I don't know that we'd want to exclude them, but I think that identifying them would be helpful so we can kind of do a breakdown between civil and criminal. And then I just want to make very clear that there's certain data that the Virginia State Bar just doesn't collect. So we'd have to survey members. And I think doing a statewide survey of members probably doesn't make sense. But if we're focusing in on certain jurisdictions, that may be a little bit easier to pin down. I'll support whatever the committee's ultimate vision is, but I cannot go into my member system and run a query that tells me in Circuit 21, who's a government attorney, who's a criminal attorney, who's a civil attorney, who's actually practicing law. I can tell age, I can tell address of record, but the demographic information is going to be a heavier lift, but it's going to be worth it, I think, if we're focusing in on, the problems in certain communities.
I just had a thought. With all this information gathering and statistical gathering, would it maybe be a good source for just us and the other organizations we belong to? So like, for example, I belong to the Local Government Attorneys of Virginia. We have conferences. What if, we set up a table at the different conferences that all of the organizations in Virginia have and use that as another means of information gathering when you have a bunch of attorneys as a captive audience?
I'd say so long as it's not duplicative, so it doesn't skew our numbers. But two things I was going to say for Judge in Waiting Solomon. You mentioned the rural versus urban, which goes back to, I know locally here, and there was a professor from Detroit that came to Southside Virginia, and it was a part of a healthcare collaborative. an initiative. I know he ran a lot of analytics and just thought that this part of Southside Virginia, I don't know why, it's so unique compared to other parts of the country. He took a special interest because he said that in parts of Southside Virginia, we have a rural urban. Actually, we have a rural urban hybrid of communities, and that makes it even more interesting. So on the map, it may look like it's rural, but once you get, when you're more focused and you were to dig a little deeper, you'll see that actually some of our communities are rural/urban. But I'd say I'd be happy to reach out because I hate for us to reinvent a lot of this, and we can focus our energy more on where we need. I'll be happy to see if they'll share that information, but I do know that they ran analytics on that, and that this professor from Detroit was super interested in our community, and grant money went into funding his research.
And when you say your community, do you mean specifically South Central Virginia, like the Danville area, or was it Virginia generally?
Actually, he did a pocket because we're on the line of the North Carolina line. So he did a part of North Carolina, and he did. I'm not sure exactly of the circumference or the diameter of how far he went out. But I know Danville, I know Pittsylvania County, I think Martinsville, Henry County, perhaps Halifax, Virginia, and then Caswell County, North Carolina. I think we're all a part of that. I don't know. I was privy to some of the information because I knew people working on the project. And I did get to hear that professor from Detroit speak and give his pitch on why he was fascinated with our community down here.
Good. Sandra, I certainly would encourage you to see what we can get out of that source.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll do it.
Yeah. Great. Okay. It's 7 after 3. And I'd like to suggest Chris and I will proceed as I described. We'll also do some survey of the committee about dates for business meetings. And as we reach agreement on field hearings and locations, we can even gather some information on those on the survey style as well. We have some FOIA limitations for how much we can meet online in the next year. Chris, could you describe that?
Yes, so VFOIA requires us to have a quorum in person in one meeting location of at least 3 voting members for hybrid and in-person meetings. So what that means is that for meetings that have to be held in person, we're going to try to move around the Commonwealth so that we're asking, a critical mass of 3 people to travel the least distance to make that meeting possible. And I think it's also meaningful for us to move around because of just the spirit of this committee's work, right? Going into the communities where you all live and work. So we've thought about that in terms of the makeup of this committee. And we may have recommendations in terms of who attends what meetings and where they're located. The other limitation is that we cannot have consecutive all virtual meetings. And we're also limited to 25% of the meetings within a calendar year can be virtual, but no more than that.
Chris,
So,
I think that number is going to go up to 50% on July 1.
really?
Yeah.
Okay. I
If
had
I'm
not
correct.
been tracking
Lola
that
may know
specifically.
too, but if you've been monitoring the FOIA bill, I think
Yeah,
that bill
well,
passed and has been approved by the governor. I think.
well, that would be great. I don't know whether it solves the consecutive meeting problem, where you can't have them back to back essentially. So what that means for us right now is that our next meeting will have to have at least 3 people in person. And then other people can participate remotely. We do have to have a majority of voting members participating in order to take action. So that means 7 people have to be participating between the 3 on site and those remote in order for us to vote and take action.
Good. I think certainly for field hearings, we want to move those quite a bit around the state. For business meetings, we can probably focus on how convenient it is to get 3 or more of us together in one room somewhere. Okay, so we'll be in touch on all those things. Good. Any other comments before we adjourn for today? All right. Thank you very much. I think this has been a great discussion. We'll be in touch by email. Thank you so much again for your interest in doing this, and look forward to more. Thank you all.